Before there was a nation of states, there was a nation of nations. Before the eagle became a symbol of a republic, it flew as a guardian of a great peace. This is the story of the Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse, and how they transformed a land of endless war into one of the oldest living democracies on Earth. Our journey begins in a time of darkness, a time of blood, when the forests of what we now call the American Northeast echoed not with the sounds of life, but with the cries of mourning. Imagine a world where every sunrise could be your last. This was the reality for the 5 nations who lived here: the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, and the Seneca. Though they shared similar languages and cultures, they were locked in a vicious, unending cycle of conflict. These weren't wars for territory in the way we might think of them today. These were blood feuds, cycles of revenge where one killing demanded another and then another, in a chain of grief that stretched back generations. The law of the land was the war club, and the only currency was sorrow. Life was a constant state of alert, where every rustle in the leaves could be an enemy, and every stranger was a potential threat. The earth itself seemed to weep, saturated with the blood of its children. The people were trapped, caught in a spiral of violence that offered no escape, no hope for a different future. The forests were dark, not just with shadow, but with fear. A new way was desperately needed, a path out of the darkness. And that path would come from a most unexpected direction. From across the Great Lake, a man arrived in a stone canoe, a vessel that symbolized the impossible nature of his mission. His name was Deganawidah, known to history as the Great Peacemaker. He was a Huron, an outsider to the 5 warring nations, and he carried a vision so radical, so completely opposite to the way of life at the time, that it was almost unbelievable. He spoke not of a greater victory or a more cunning way to wage war, but of its complete abolition. He preached the Iroquois, the great law of peace. The peacemaker's vision was of a new social structure, a mighty longhouse that would stretch across the territories of all 5 nations. Instead of being separate, warring families, they would become one extended family, sheltered under a single strong roof. This longhouse wouldn't be built with wood and bark, but with principles. First was Deganawidah, righteousness, meaning people must treat each other fairly, with justice for all. The second was sken and health, which meant not just a healthy body, but a sound mind and a peaceful society. The third was Densha, power, but not the power of an individual or a war chief. This was the power of the people, united in their shared mind and shared purpose, acting together for the common good. The peacemaker's message was revolutionary. Peace was not something to be won through conquest, but something to be built through consensus and reason. But a vision, no matter how powerful, needs a voice to carry it. The peacemaker had a speech impediment, and he knew he could not carry this message alone. He needed a partner, an orator, who could articulate the profound beauty of his plan. He would find that voice in a man consumed by the very grief he sought to end. That man was Hiawatha. It's not the fictional character from the Longfellow poem, but a real historical figure. It's an Onondaga man whose life had been shattered by the endless warfare. Hiawatha had lost everything. In some versions of the story, his wife and daughters were killed, victims of the very blood feuds the peacemaker wanted to stop. He was a man hollowed out by sorrow, living alone in the wilderness, his mind clouded by grief, so tormented he could no longer think straight or function among his people. It was in this broken state that the peacemaker found him. The peacemaker did not offer weapons for revenge or empty promises. Instead, he performed what would become one of the most sacred ceremonies of the Haudenosaunee, the Condolence ritual. With soft words and symbolic strings of wampum beads, he metaphorically wiped the tears from Hiawatha's eyes so he could see again. He cleared the obstructions from his ears so he could hear again, and he cleared the blockage from his throat so he could speak again. The ritual was a profound act of healing, a spiritual and psychological medicine that restored Hiawatha's mind. It acknowledged his pain, comforted his spirit, and brought him back from the brink of despair. In that moment, Hiawatha was transformed. The grief that had crippled him was channeled into a powerful purpose. He saw the truth in the peacemaker's vision of unity and became its most passionate and eloquent advocate. The man who was once silenced by sorrow was now given the voice that would change the course of history for his people. Together, the visionary and the orators set out on their mission to convince the 5 warring nations to accept the great law of peace. Their journey was not easy. They faced skepticism, ridicule, and outright hostility. The ways of war were deeply ingrained. The first nation they approached was the Mohawk, the people of the Flint. Known for their fierce warrior culture, they were a crucial first step. Hiawatha spoke with the power of his own experience, explaining how the cycle of revenge only created more suffering. He laid out the principles of the great law, showing how unity would bring a strength that no single nation could ever achieve on its own. After much debate, the Mohawk chiefs accepted the message. They agreed to join the great Longhouse. Next came the Oneida, the people of the Standing Stone, who followed the Mohawks' lead, persuaded by the logic and power of the message. The Cayuga, the people of the Great Swamp, and the Seneca, the people of the Great Hill, also saw the wisdom in this new way and agreed to join the Union. But one nation remained the most powerful and feared of them all, the Onondaga. The Onondaga were led by a fearsome and twisted chief, a sorcerer named Tadodaho. His body was said to be crooked, his hair a tangle of writhing snakes, his mind as warped as his form. He represented the embodiment of the old ways of war, chaos, and individual power. Tadodaho rejected the message of peace, using his dark influence to keep his people in a state of fear and conflict. He was the final, most dangerous obstacle. The Peacemaker and Hiawatha knew they could not defeat him with force, as that would violate the very principles they preached. Instead, they gathered the leaders of the other 4 United Nations. They approached Tadodaho not with weapons, but with the combined spiritual strength of their unified minds. They sang the peace hymn, a song of healing and unity. They combed the snakes from his hair, straightened his crooked body, and healed his twisted mind. They did not destroy him. They transformed him. And in a final, brilliant act of diplomacy, they offered him a position of honor within the new Confederacy. Tadodaho would be the keeper of the Central Council Fire, the moderator of the Grand Council, ensuring his power was now used to maintain peace, not to create war. With Tadodaho's acceptance, the Union was complete. At a great council held on the shores of Onondaga Lake, the leaders of the 5 nations gathered to formally establish their new government. This was the birth of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. They used the metaphor of the Longhouse to explain their new relationship. It was a single, great house, stretching across their territories, where all were one family. The Mohawk located in the east were named the Keepers of the Eastern Door. It was their duty to watch for dangers approaching from that direction. The Seneca, in the west, became the Keepers of the Western Door, with the same responsibility. In the center sat the Onondaga, who were designated the Keepers of the Central Fire and the Wampum, meaning they would host the Grand Council and preserve their laws and history. The Oneida and the Cayuga were the younger brothers, seated between their elder siblings. They planted a great white pine, the tree of peace. At its base, the leaders buried their weapons of war, casting them into an underground river to be carried away forever. An eagle was placed at the very top of the tree to watch over the Confederacy and cry out a warning if any danger approached the peace. The great law of peace was codified, a complex constitution that balanced power between nations and between the people and their leaders. It established rules for governance, for raising up and deposing chiefs, for adopting new nations, and for ensuring that freedom and justice prevailed. This wasn't just an alliance. It was a federal government, a union built on consent, designed to last for generations. And it has. In the early 18th century, the Tuscarora Nation joined, and the 5 nations became the 6 nations, as they are known today. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy has survived for centuries, a living testament to the power of peace and the vision of a prophet and an orator who dared to imagine a better world. Their ideas of federalism, individual liberty, and the separation of powers would later influence the thinkers who founded the United States. This incredible story is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, a new path is possible. It teaches us that true strength is found not in division, but in unity, and that the most powerful weapon we possess is not a war club, but a reasoned voice calling for peace. Their governing document, the Great Law of Peace, was one of the most sophisticated systems of representative government in the world at the time. This wasn't a kingdom ruled by a single monarch's decree. Instead, it was a true democracy, a blueprint for a society where law came from collective agreement. At the heart of this system were the chiefs, the sachems, but they didn't hold absolute power. They were chosen, guided, and if necessary, removed by a group of powerful women, the clan mothers. Think about that for a moment. The ultimate authority rested with the women of the clans. Furthermore, major decisions couldn't be made by a simple majority vote. They required consensus. This was a crucial element, designed to protect the voices of minorities and ensure that every nation, every clan, felt heard and respected. It forced deliberation, compromise, and a search for common ground, rather than a quick and divisive vote. This intricate system of checks and balances ensured that power was distributed, preventing any single person or group from becoming too dominant. It was a government truly of the people, by the people, and for the people. Now, how do you record laws, treaties, and epic histories in a world without a written alphabet? The Haudenosaunee had an ingenious and beautiful solution: wampum. These weren't just decorative beads. Wampum belts were intricate, living documents woven from thousands of tiny, cylindrical shells, purple from the quahog clam, and white from the whelk. Each pattern, each design, held specific meaning. A belt could represent a treaty between nations, with figures holding hands to signify their alliance. It could codify a law or serve as a credential for a messenger. When diplomats met, they didn't just speak, they exchanged wampum. The act of presenting a belt gave weight and solemnity to their words. It made promises tangible, something you could see and touch. Reading a wampum belt was a specialized skill, passed down through generations. The keeper of the wampum was like a living historian, an archivist, able to narrate the stories and agreements woven into the shells. Diplomacy wasn't just a conversation, it was a sacred ritual, a weaving together of peoples, with wampum serving as the thread that bound their words and honor together. It was a system that relied on memory, community, and the physical embodiment of trust. So, who were these clan mothers, the women who held the power to appoint and depose the chiefs? They were the bedrock of Haudenosaunee society. The entire social structure was matrilineal, meaning lineage and inheritance passed through the mother's side. When you were born, you belonged to your mother's clan, and you lived in a longhouse with her extended family. The clan mothers were the heads of these family lineages. Their power was immense and deeply respected. They weren't just kingmakers. They were the guardians of the land, as land ownership was vested in the women. They had the final say on whether the nation would go to war. They attended council meetings, offering their wisdom and ensuring the chiefs acted in the best interest of the people. If a chief failed in his duties, was dishonest, or ignored the will of the people, the clan mothers would give him 3 warnings. If he still didn't change his ways, they would ceremonially strip him of his authorities, symbolized by removing the deer antlers from his headdress. In this society, female political power wasn't a radical idea or an exception. It was the foundation of civic life, the source of stability, and the ultimate guarantee of the people's well-being. The Great Law of Peace created a powerful internal stability, but this peace within did not necessarily mean peace without. The arrival of Europeans in the 17th century introduced a new and incredibly valuable commodity: beaver fur. European fashion demanded it for hats, and the Haudenosaunee found themselves at the center of a lucrative and fiercely competitive trade network. To control this trade, they needed more territory, more hunting grounds, and fewer rivals. What followed was a period of intense conflict known as the Beaver Wars. For nearly a century, the Confederacy unleashed its unified military might across the region. Their warriors, highly skilled and strategically brilliant, were a formidable force. They were not just fighting for pelts, they were fighting for economic dominance and survival in a rapidly changing world. They pushed out and absorbed rival nations from the Great Lakes all the way down to the Ohio Valley. Their campaigns were devastating, reshaping the demographic and political map of northeastern North America forever. The Confederacy became an empire in its own right, a dominant power that both French and English colonists had to respect, negotiate with, and often fear. This era proved that the unity forged by the Peacemaker was not only a tool for internal harmony, but also for projecting immense power outward. Imagine two boats traveling down the same river, side by side. One is a Haudenosaunee canoe, the other a European ship. They move in parallel, never interfering with each other's course. This powerful image is the two-row wampum, a treaty belt representing a profound diplomatic vision the Haudenosaunee offered to the Dutch and English newcomers. The two purple lines on a field of white beads symbolize this agreement, two distinct peoples, traveling the river of life together in peace and friendship. Each nation would steer its own vessel, respecting the other's laws, customs, and sovereignty. It wasn't a treaty of surrender. It was a pact of mutual respect, a blueprint for coexistence that could have changed the course of history on this continent. It was a promise to live as equals, not as conqueror and conquered. This principle of non-interference was a cornerstone of Haudenosaunee diplomacy. Built upon the foundation of their own great law of peace, they saw themselves not as subjects, but as partners. The wampum belt itself was a living document, a sacred pledge renewed through ceremony and shared understanding. For a time, this ideal of separate but equal paths seemed possible. The Haudenosaunee and European powers engaged in complex trade and political alliances. Navigating the turbulent waters of a changing world, the two-row wampum represented a hope for a future where different cultures could thrive alongside one another, sharing the land without trying to control or erase each other. It was a radical idea then, and it remains a powerful lesson for us today. But then, the river of life grew stormy. The American Revolution erupted. A conflict between two European powers that tore through Haudenosaunee lands and families. This wasn't their war, yet it placed them in an impossible position. They were caught between the British, their long-standing allies under the Covenant chain, and the newly formed United States, which had its own ambitions for the land. The pressure was immense, and the Great Council at Onondaga faced a decision that threatened to break their centuries-old unity. The very essence of the Confederacy acting as one was challenged. Ultimately, in a desperate attempt to preserve the Confederacy as a whole, the Council made a fateful decision. They would extinguish the Central Council fire, allowing each of the 6 nations to choose its own path through the war. It was a choice born of necessity, a strategy to ensure that no matter which side won, some part of the Haudenosaunee would survive. But the cost was devastating. The great law of peace, designed to prevent internal conflict, could not stop a civil war. The house they had built together was divided. Oneida and Tuscarora, influenced by missionary Samuel Kirkland and their proximity to patriot settlements, chose to side with the Americans. In contrast, the Mohawk, Seneca, Onondaga, and Cayuga, led by influential figures like Joseph Brant, honored their long-standing alliance with the British Crown. Brother turned against brother, village against village. The war that followed was brutal. Haudenosaunee warriors fought on both sides of the conflict, often against their own kin. The Americans, under George Washington's orders, launched the Sullivan-Clinton campaign in 1779. It was a scorched earth mission with a clear objective: the total destruction of Haudenosaunee towns and agriculture. Dozens of villages were burned to the ground, and vast fields of corn, beans, and squash were systematically destroyed right before winter. The campaign was not just a military action. It was an act of terror designed to break the spirit of the people and drive them from their ancestral homes. Thousands became refugees, fleeing starvation and the bitter cold. The town destroyer, as the Haudenosaunee came to call Washington, had inflicted a wound that would never fully heal. Regardless of which side they had chosen, the Haudenosaunee were destined to lose. When the cannons finally fell silent and the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, the Haudenosaunee were left out of the negotiations. Their British allies had abandoned them, ceding all lands east of the Mississippi to the new United States, lands that were not theirs to give. The promises of the Covenant chain were broken. The Americans, now victorious, saw the Haudenosaunee not as sovereign partners, but as conquered enemies. The spirit of the two-row wampum of 2 vessels traveling peacefully side by side was utterly forgotten by the new nation. The American ship was now determined to steer the Haudenosaunee canoe or sink it entirely. This betrayal was formalized in a series of imposed treaties, The 1784 Treaty of Fort Stanwix was a prime example. Haudenosaunee representatives were held as hostages to force a land cession. It was a treaty signed under duress, a document of coercion, not consent. Subsequent agreements, like the Treaty of Canandaigua in 1794, acknowledged Haudenosaunee sovereignty on paper, but were consistently violated in practice. Land speculators and settlers, hungry for territory, pushed relentlessly westward. The great chain of friendship which had once bound the nations together in peace was shattered. The land base of the Haudenosaunee shrank dramatically as millions of acres were taken through fraudulent deals and political pressure. Communities that had stood for centuries were uprooted. A long, dark period began, a period of forced removal, grinding poverty, in a systematic assault on their language, culture, and spiritual beliefs. The goal of the United States government was clear: assimilation. To force the original people of this land to disappear into the American mainstream, to break their identity, and to extinguish their fire forever. But the fire did not go out. Against all odds, the central fire at Onondaga, the heart of the Confederacy, continued to burn. Through centuries of unimaginable pressure, through land theft, forced schooling, and political marginalization, the Haudenosaunee held on. They clung to their identity, their ceremonies, their clan system, and their understanding of the world. They kept the great law of peace alive, passing it down through generations, not just as a historical memory, but as a living constitution. They never surrendered their sovereignty. They continued to see themselves as nations, not as subjects. Today, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy endures. They are sovereign nations existing within the borders of the United States and Canada, a testament to incredible resilience. They're fighting in courts and in international forums to have their treaty rights recognized. They're working tirelessly to revitalize their languages, bringing back the words that carry their unique worldview. They are leaders in environmental protection, drawing on ancient wisdom to advocate for the health of the earth. The story of the Haudenosaunee is not just a tragedy of the past. It is a powerful, ongoing story of survival and strength. The great law of peace, a model of federalism and consensus-based democracy that was born in the forests of this land long before the United States was even a dream, remains as relevant as ever. It reminds us all that the fire of a people, fueled by culture, law, and an unbreakable spirit, can never truly be extinguished. Thank you for watching. If you found this story meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into history.